Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back for another episode of It's Another Thing, the E2KG Network's television show podcast that covers short season format television shows. So, kind of what we think of and what you might think of as I think of them as British format or European format television shows. These shows that generally run anywhere from 6 to 13 episodes a season. Here with me, as always, is my stalwart companion, Mr. David Pecci. How you doing, Dave?
Good. How are you? I guess
Good. Good, very good. And joining us for the first time ever in
No,
studio.
It's the second time.
Second
second.
time? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Miss Stephen Laura. How you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing great. I'm doing good.
Okay, my usual companion for the What's Your Issue comic book podcast, which we normally record on Monday evenings. So tonight we are continuing our coverage of The Gifted Season 2. We have 3 episodes to run down tonight. Episode number 9, Game Changer. Episode number 10, Enemy of My Enemy. And episode number 11, Memento. Here's your one and only warning. This is a spoilery, FanCasty review show. We will be talking about every detail of the episode. Every detail is fair game. We may not discuss everyone, but every single detail of all of these episodes is open for discussion. So if you haven't watched all of them or you're not caught up, maybe you've only watched episode 9, listen to that part of the show, and then go away and then come back. However you want to manage it, your time is up to you. Let's talk about episode number 9, Game Changer, with the M in game capitalized as we invoke thoughts of House of M, Magneto, and other things. Quick synopsis of the episode. In this episode, we get a flashback, and all of these episodes, I guess maybe this whole season, but definitely the last 3 have started off with some historical flashback. So Rebecca's parents turn her into Sentinel services in the flashback, which is a pretty, is a kind of horrifying scene for me. Andy accidentally kills her in the process of thwarting her attack on the inner circle. Johnny Marcos and Clarice kidnap an analyst from Regimen Technologies. The inner circle plans to hit Regimen. They find out that the inner circle plans to hit Regimen because Regimen winds up being the engineering company that controls all of the mutant prison collars. So all of the neck collars that you've seen in all of the episodes leading up to this point are theoretically done by one company and are all wired back to some master level control system. In an attack by the Purifiers on the Mutant Underground's location, Thunderbird is captured by now Purifier Jace Turner. If you recall, at the end of episode 8, that the Struckers had gone to seek help from Otto's former lab partner, Madeline. And in this episode, we find out that Lauren's DNA actually has 2 strains of the X gene. The Struckers also destroy the lab in this episode as Lauren determines that Madeline is actually out to figure out how to suppress the X gene in everyone, a la Shades of X3. And finally, Polaris and Andy destroy the regiment's servers, freeing every incarcerated mutant in the country. Dave, any general feelings on this episode before we start talking about a few specific scenes?
Let's see. I mean, they kind of had to get rid of Rebecca. Like, I didn't have really strong feelings for 9, for season 2, episode 9. I kind of got more into episode 10 and episode 11. Possibly because 9 was the one that I've seen like the longest ago, so it's not as fresh. But yeah, I think 10 and 11 really, I think were really good. And I think that the season's going to be ending on a high note. Because we have 2 more episodes left. Oh, so January 22nd is the last one. So, I'm hoping that like it kind of seems like they're setting up for like one major reveal before the season ends. So we'll have to see how it goes. It also feels like the way like these past 3 episodes, it seems like there'd be another season of Gifted, but I don't know. I'm hopeful. That's just the feeling that I get from these last 3 episodes. If it would feel weird if they ended it on this season.
Yeah, no, I pretty much agree. Steven, any kind of general feelings about episode number 9 before we start talking about some specific scenes?
Sorry, but I hated it. Because I did not like I did not like trying to get to know Inside Out, whatever. Rebecca, I think, yeah, Rebecca, getting to know her, and they like trying to make you sympathize with her, and then you just kill her off. It's like, what was the point of getting to know her if you kill her off? It's just like, it feels like we're going through Shatter again. It's like, what? How you expect me to feel sorry? Feel anything for these characters if you kill them right away, and that's what gets me annoying.
That is if you liked her in the beginning. I didn't really care.
I didn't like her at the beginning still. Too, but it's just they make you try to feel sympathy for her, and then they kill her off, and it's like, even though I don't know how you could feel sympathy for this person. Person's out of whack. I don't know where her things lie.
We're definitely going to delve into that as we talk about a few of these specific scenes. So let me talk you guys through a few scenes that I picked out. So at about minute 9 in this episode, we get the scene between Sage, played by actress Haley Lovett, and Reva, played by Grace Byers, formerly of Empire, and now part of this cast. This is where Sage comes in and tells Reva that Rebecca is not taking well to being incarcerated and won't stop screaming. So part of the question that sprung to my mind in this scene is, as I look back on it, I was like, did Reva know that? Because, she and Sage go back and forth, and Sage specifically says at one point, like, it's a shame, with her powers, she could have done remarkable things. And Reva looks at her and says, she still has a part to play. And at this point, I started thinking back about it. I'm like, has Rebecca really just been a big litmus test for Andy? Is this really about nailing the half of the Strucker that she has and getting him to take a stand and declare his final loyalty and fealty to the Inner Circle? Is this about forcing Andy to break her out, and in the way that unfolded thereafter, driving him to a point where he was going to choose a side? And it really made me think about the whole thing about Rebecca. Was recruiting Rebecca really all about testing Andy's loyalty, or did that emerge when she went nuts? And I'm going to cut to that a second time a little bit later this episode. But I guess I wanted to ask you guys that.
Yeah, no, I definitely feel that. It would seem she kind of did her bank heist, and then I feel, after that it feels more like she was just kept around so she could test Andy. Because as we're seeing, she's losing Lorna, but I feel like she might be done with Lorna by now. Like Lorna, I feel like I don't think she's gonna go back with Eclipse, but I feel like she's going to go her own separate path.
Yeah, and when you think about their power sets, right? Andy is the only other one who could take out a large group of humans in one fell swoop, right? She had 2 of them. She had Rebecca and she had Andy. And one other way she may have been looking about it as like redundancy in the system, right? Having had Rebecca flake out on her and go nuts, I wonder if, okay, so now what I need to do is I need to make sure that my one other, Joker in hand is stable. So I'm going to keep, I'm going to force this issue to get him to pick a side. I don't know, Steven, did you have any thoughts on that?
Is for Annie to choose a side, or?
Yeah, that possibly the only reason Riva hunted Rebecca down and brought her back and had her incarcerated wasn't really to drive Rebecca nuts, but was to drive Andy to action and force him into a situation where he would have to choose between Rebecca and the inner circle. And in doing so, potentially, if he chooses the inner circle, potentially cement his loyalty.
I don't know what's gonna happen with Andy because a lot of things happen in the next 2 episodes. I don't know what Andy's gonna be on after all that happens.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll continue to unpack that a little bit as we talk about those other 2 episodes. One of the things I found funny in this scene also is, and it's a very comic booky effect, is that if you think back to the X-Men, one of the big things about the Hellfire Club, and there's a point in this podcast where I'm just going to start calling them the Hellfire Club instead of the Inner Circle, because that's really what they are, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
The Hellfire Club was always very rich. And everybody was like, they were also concurrently members of high society in New York. And so it's funny how in this episode you can kind of more and more blatantly see that that everybody who's part of the Hellfire Club now is very high class. Like when Sage comes in, she has on like a sleek black dress and like long dangling earrings. Like, and then you think back to her in season 1 when she had like torn up jeans and a grimy tank top because they were all living like out of a hellhole. I just thought that was like starkly apparent in costuming in this episode. So if you jump a couple of minutes ahead, you get to the scene with Polaris, obviously played by Emma Dumont, and Andy, where he comes into the room and asks her how she feels about giving up Dawn, whether or not what they're doing is worth Polaris having to give up her daughter. Andy questions a bunch of things, and it's interesting to me in this scene particularly how he's in this scene, he's no longer the little kid who kind of followed her to the inner circle. You go back to the beginning of the season, and it was very much like Andy having an older sister, right? And it felt like those scenes of like the 11-year-old brother coming into like a teenage sister's room and saying, "Hey, what's going on with mom and dad?" Right? But I felt like this scene kind of put them a little bit more, not quite on equal footing, but also not as separated as they had been at the beginning of the season. And the other thing is that it's also clear in the scene that Lorna's own confidence in the cause is a little shaken. You could see Emma Dumont kind of emote facially a couple times, how as she's talking Andy through it, she's also kind of concurrently convincing herself. And also in the scene, again, with the costumes, right? With what Andy's wearing and Polaris is wearing, like, it just, between these 2 scenes in a row, like, as it comes to the end, I'm like, this feels like it's like a Fox commercial for Melrose Place. Like, everybody in the inner circle is so fashionable and so posh and so hip with the hairstyles and everything. And I'm like, wait, Melrose Place was also a Fox show. So it wouldn't necessarily surprise me if there's some Melrose Place DNA or 90210 DNA around the set of The Gifted. So any thoughts about like that chemistry in episode 9? And do you guys feel like that's their relationship is changing between Andy and Polaris?
Yeah, no, I definitely feel like if Polaris like started her own group, I feel like Andy would follow her because like he's already associating Riva with shit. I kind of lost like this girl that I liked because of you. So like if he ever had a choice, like Polaris or Riva, he'd be like, I'm ditching you, you know. And it's kind of interesting. I really like, how they give you all these backstories to all of these side characters and all that, it's very Marvel Netflixy too, right? Because we've talked about this in our other podcasts, how they give us, almost an episode on like Karen or, Pops or Misty, and it's like this. They do the same thing in The Gifted. We get these long backstories to even like the most minor characters. And I don't know, like, if it's as effective it is in The Gifted as it is in Marvel's Netflix, because I feel like, at least in Marvel's Netflix, I feel like, I mean, they do it every time, like, right before, like, something happens to a character, right? They want to, like, be all, like, they want to try to, like, I feel like in this TV series, though, it's not as effective because I'm not so focused on emotional ties in this as I am about what this, like, the outcome, like, what's the conclusion of this battle.
It's tough because it's again, it's very much like an X-Men comic in actuality, right? You think about the scale between this and a Netflix show. The one thing I'll say about the Netflix shows is they do keep things relatively tight. I mean, we often say that sometimes we feel like the shows aren't tightly focused, but in comparison, like on a scale, they are more focused in this show. There's, on average in the Netflix show, 2 to maybe 5 characters max, right? That they kind of spread that focal point of story around per episode plot. In The Gifted, you've got like 12 to 15 characters that they're trying to get into. So yeah, I feel the same way, that like just the amount of attention they're able to spread around the other characters feels a little hard for them to manage. Steven, any thoughts on the relationship between Polaris and Andy and whether or not it's growing and changing as we go through episode 9?
Not sure. Sorry.
Yeah, that's cool. So the third series.
I want to add on that note, but you're right. There's very similarities about how an X-Men comic is to like how this is, because right, in an X-Men comic, I'm not so much concerned about, like, you know, the relationship between Colossus and Kitty and all that drama. I do want that. You know, you could say in many X-Men novels, there's always Jean and Cyclops. Here it's like Thunderbird and Blink. So yeah, we can say there's parallels, but I feel like the X-Men has never been like this, like drawn out to like all the personalities. Like if you're reading Daredevil, you know, it gets really into like Matt, Foggy, and I forget his new Blindside, I think, is his sidekick, and
It's
that
Blind Spot.
Yeah, sorry, I haven't read.
It's okay.
And it makes more sense to get deep and emotional on the Netflix than Daredevil. But X-Men, it's more about kind of, let's keep it to like the social injustice, you know, the purifiers, you know, the hate groups. Like that's what I enjoy about the X-Men. It represents the oppressed people of the time, rather it's like the immigrants or, you know, the civil rights era and all that.
Yeah, so in that way, it's I guess I still feel like it feels like an X. There are parallels to it in X-Men comics. I guess what you're saying, which I agree with, would help me pinpoint it down to it's a mid, not even mid 1980s. It's like a whenever the second generation of X-Men were introduced, what I call X-Men International, which is when they introduced like Thunderbird, Colossus, Wolverine, Nightcrawler, right? So you had a German mutant, a Canadian mutant, a Russian mutant, right? And then and Banshee, so you had a Scottish mutant. Yeah, so and during that time period, which was heavily influenced, I think, by the 60s and the civil rights movement, you had a comic that was fairly tightly grounded in race relations and civil rights. So the next thing that I want to talk about happens at about, so all these scenes are pretty early in this episode at about minute 12. When you have the conversation in the garage between Eclipse, Blink, and Thunderbird, who in their decision to kidnap an exec from Regiment Technologies. And what's most notable in this scene is the growing rift between John and Clarice. In particular, the boldness and aggressiveness and extent to which Clarice is differing with the approach John and Marcus want to make. And this has kind of felt like it's been growing, right? So you go back to season 1, Clarice was kind of the new person in the group, and more so as this season has gone on. And she the first few episodes, she was kind of following Marcos and John's lead. This, to me, marks one of the pivotal points where she is starting to become more assertive in kind of that third role in the leadership of the Mutant Underground. I don't know. Did you guys start to get that sense during this episode as well, Stephen?
Yeah, I did. I know she's being more assertive with herself and others.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay. Cool. Last thing I want to talk about this episode takes place about minute 27. This is the scene between Reva and Andy, played by Percy Hines White. Reva admits that to Andy. So Andy is arguing with her about how she's treating Rebecca, saying that, hey, she was already caged in a mental hospital and treated poorly, and because Reva comes in and says, hey, she killed a bunch of people, and Andy's like, well, she was treated a certain way by humans. You take her out on her first mission in this high stress situation. What did you expect to happen? And Reva admits to Andy that, you know what, he's right. And then as I watch her, I'm like, this is the point where I'm like, she's playing him. Like, this is total manipulation on her part. As she walks him through this conversation of like, where's your commitment, where's your loyalty, and walks him through this notion that, yes, you're absolutely right. You know what? It's not Rebecca's fault. It's their fault. But what we're fighting for is this opportunity where somebody like Rebecca can get the help that she needs. One of the things that brought up was, and I think we've talked about it before, Dave, is this is a thing that happened at least once. I can't remember the season. The road to, I can't remember what it is. I think it was season 4 of The Walking Dead, but it's the one where they all get split up in their exodus from the prison, and they all wind up at different points of the timeline on this railroad, the road to Terminus. And part of this path to Terminus, one of the things that happens is Carol, and I forget who else, I think it's Tyrese, they're together and they get separated and they encounter these young girls, one of which suffers some real mental health issues. She thinks that the walkers are still alive and can be communicated with, and she's actually playing with one. And when Tyrese and Carol leave the girls unsupervised, it's her younger sister, and actually Carol and Tyrese have Rick Grimes's baby, who was born right before the prison fell. But the point is when they're not supervised, this girl kills her sister because she wants her to come back as a walker because she thinks that will make her sister immortal. But my whole point of this is that part of this conversation Reva has is very similar, where it invokes this question of, what if somebody who needed mental health treatment lived in a world where they couldn't receive it, right? The people who have to live with that person treat them differently. The whole point of that episode in The Walking Dead was Carol wound up having to kill this kid because she was a threat to the group, and there were not facilities to deal with her. There was no way to give her treatment, so she had to be killed. Similarly to back in like medieval times or the Old West, when somebody had a terminal sickness and there was no way to treat it, they had to kill them so they wouldn't infect the rest of the town or whatever. And this poses the question, what if you're a mutant who lives in this time and you need mental health treatment? This society is one in which mutants can't get mental health treatment. So at any rate, it brings me around to the question again. So having presented yet another piece of evidence to you, I'll ask you again, do you feel at this point that Reva is manipulating Andy in a large part of what is going on in episode 9, and this whole experience with Rebecca is about kind of building him up emotionally and then stripping him down to bare bolts so that he can see the world with some eyes of clarity and come to a decision about his loyalty to the inner circle?
Of course. Yeah, she's extremely manipulative.
All right, Steven, anything else on that?
I could see she's manipulative too, as I could say.
All right, cool. Let's go on to episode number 10. So enemy of my enemy. So in this one, Jace, one of the things that happened, I think I mentioned it last episode, is John Thunderbird gets captured and he's taken to a purifier compound. We find out in this episode it is being interrogated by Jace Turner. The Mutant Underground reluctantly asks Lorna and the Hellfire Club for help in rescuing John. Lorna and Andy find the compound and then decide that they're not just going to help them by finding it. They're going to actually help them in the assault and not tell their friends in the inner circle. John tells Jace Turner about the inner circle, and Jace starts to believe him and starts to believe in this concept that there has been a mutant schism between the Mutant Underground and another faction of mutants, and that maybe he needs to think of some of the things he's seeing as being perpetrated by two different groups. But then, unfortunately, the gig is up because on the cameras in the compound, he sees Polaris and Eclipse launching an assault on the compound. He doesn't know that it's an X-Men Hellfire Club team-up and thinks Thunderbird is trying to dupe him. And then in the escape, Andy tortures a purifier who tries to shoot Lauren. And then when he gets done, he's kind of like, that's what he gets. That's what he gets. Did you see that? And his family's all looking at him like he's cray-cray. And then Andy's like, oh, well, they just all see me as a monster. And in a flourish of teen angst, just heads for one of the Humvees. Any general feelings or thoughts on this episode before we get into specific scenes?
I enjoyed this one more. I definitely think we're getting to the point of no return for Jace's character. I don't know if we've hit it yet.
What's funny about that to me, Dave, is like we say that every episode, right? Every time we think that dude has hit rock bottom, like he can't get any more evil, and then he like twists himself up into some other like freaking like just bad moral decision. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I definitely thought I thought we hit that a long time ago, but apparently we haven't hit that point. So I'm really just hoping we hit that point finally. But nonetheless, I really liked the team up. I think this was a good setup to bring Lorna and Eclipse back together because honestly, there's only two relationships I want to see in this show. Lorna and Eclipse and Blink and Thunderbird. And that's about as much as I can handle. So hopefully they don't throw in, anything else at us. I don't want to see because we had for a while Lauren had her little boyfriend, and then we had Andy and Rebecca. I mean, just they gotta focus on the story and kind of I love every Morlock scene we've had. That's been great. They could focus more on that. So other than that, it was a good action episode. And that's kind of my gist for it.
Yeah, I felt the same way too. I felt like this has been the best action episode of the show in a long time. Steven, general thoughts on this before we dive into specific episodes? Or specific scenes?
I didn't like this episode either. It's just that the contradictions that happen in the show gets me annoyed because I didn't understand. Andy tortured the purifier, which I didn't care much about. It's just that it's just I don't understand how the mother could feel like, oh my god, my son is a monster when she just drugged the guy a few episodes ago. Like she drugged up the guy to death, and she doesn't see the monsters inside of herself. That she's doing the same thing that the son is doing, so she couldn't try to like, oh my god, my son's a monster when you're a monster too. It just stop. It's like,
Well, that's an interesting notion because
Yeah.
it actually comes back around in scene in episode 11, and I don't mind jumping ahead a little bit to have the discussion. I think for them, and there's controversy here because not everybody agrees on this angle on ethics. I think for them, it's a matter of thresholds, right? The difference to me is that for Caitlin, it's situational, right? She does bad things to people who have either done bad things to her or her family, or when those things have to be done on an individual scale, right? Kind of the way I feel. Like if somebody ever came after like one of my kids, right, the bounds of legality and justice are off the table. The difference is that, and I think one of the key lines in this episode is Andy doesn't just torture that dude. He comes back and he says they all deserve to die. So he is presenting limitless scale in his application of immorality. We get a very similar statement in episode 11 where Polaris is talking to Riva about the people that she just recruited into the Hellfire Club, who in the past sunk an entire cruise ship that had innocent people on it and children. And Riva said, well, you took down the Trask airplane. From Polaris's perspective, she took down the Trask airplane because it had Trask on board and some very specific people who knowingly had done some very specific things. And her line is, there are thresholds, right? There are lines, and when people cross them, right? And so in her mind, I think it's a matter of scale. It's a matter of specifically targeting very specific people versus kind of global, unadulterated, non-specific, right? Which is again, when you look at the Geneva Conventions, is an application that we apply in warfare, right? If you target military people, that's okay. You're not supposed to expand that angle, that aperture, and take out civilians or even unarmed combatants, right? So I don't know. That's I guess that's just the other perspective. I don't know, Dave, were you going to mention something along those lines?
No, I totally agree with you on that. Yeah, it's kind of. Oh, go on.
Well, I don't, Steven. I'm also not trying to say, well, you can't like the episode, right? You can't not like the episode. I'm not saying that. I'm just.
I didn't think of anything of that. Anyway.
Okay, yeah.
I just always have a habit of apologizing when I don't like something because I'm used to people getting mad because I don't like a certain thing.
No, man. You and I do a show every week where we very specifically talk. Yeah, put a score on things.
I know you don't, but people outside of you guys do that.
Right. So let's go ahead and dive into some specific scenes. About minute number 10 into the show, Marcos and Blink are taking off for the meeting with Polaris. He's got Slade in the trunk. And one of the things that I find very funny in the opening sequence of the show, and it's so appropriate, there is one thing that is a constant, and this is that everyone hated Slade before the Mutant Underground even split to go off with the Hellfire Circle, and that remains consistent. He is just a total prick. And if you remember in season 1, he was a jerk to the Struckers, and he continues to be a jerk that people don't like. And again, we see in this conversation this further reinforcement that in some ways it's going to be interesting. I think Polaris is going to come back to the Mutant Underground. Maybe. I guess I can see the tangent where she just doesn't come back. And maybe one of the reasons she doesn't come back is because there might not be any room for her. In a lot of ways, Blink is kind of replacing Lorna in the power structure of the Mutant Underground. And again, more and more so she's... Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, yeah, I would say too, like, I'm sure Eclipse would welcome her back, but everybody else might say, nah. We don't want you in here. You might taint the water, as people usually are like that. So we might see this where Eclipse is like, well, if I'm gonna go with my girlfriend, then that's what I'm waiting to see. That's why I'm sure she might want to come back, but I don't think she'd be welcome back.
Yeah, there's also the possibility that she comes back into the relationship with Marcos, but doesn't formally become part of the Mutant Underground, which again would kind of be analogous to the comic, where for a very long time, Polaris is kind of ambiguous as to whether or not she's aligned with good or evil. She's kind of on her own and in between, and she has this loyalty to Magneto, but isn't full on like Hellfire. Like she constantly dances across those lines with her alignment. So I can see that being played as well. But again, the thing that I noted particularly in this scene was just this this dynamic shift in the power system between, where it used to be Marcos Lorna, and now it's becoming John Clarice plus Marcos. So it's just a slight pivot in that power structure that I find interesting. And I also find it interesting how it characterizes the leadership of the group. When it was Marcos Lorna, their relationship is very passionate, a slight bit unstable, right? Because you have Marcos, who in a lot of ways is hyper violent and very quick to temper, becoming less so, but he was definitely painted in that picture. And then he's with Lorna, who's bipolar. So you tend to, in those conversations between those three people, sometimes get this very super aggressive way of coming at things, and John being the voice of reason. Now that power structure is pivoting, where you have John, I think, in the absence of Lorna, kind of drifting more towards Marcos, and Clarice trying to be the voice of reason. So I thought that was very interesting. I don't know, did you guys disagree or have any other thoughts on those notions?
I agree with you. I do see the same thing, and I do agree with Dave when it comes to the. I do like Lorna and Marcos being together. I do like Clarice and John, the Thunderbird character. Yeah, Thunderbird being together. Yeah, that's it.
Cool. Dave, anything to add before we go to the next scene?
Nope.
Okay. Minute 14. So a few minutes later, we get a scene between Jace and Officer Ted Wilson. So right after they come out of the interrogation room where they were just dealing with John. Now this is this starts hitting the point, Stephen, where I align with you with some of these things that are nonsensical in this show. And first of all, it's a comic book show. Sometimes things aren't going to make sense, right? It's sometimes hard to argue for a voice of reality on a show where people can control magnetism and fire solar beams out of their hands. However, I do want my shows to have, commit to a structure and maintain it. One of the things that's kind of boggles my mind, and it's evident in this scene, is how frequently it seems like the writing team just completely ignores how the rule of law works.
Yes. Oh God.
Right. But then concurrently invokes it, right? Like several scenes later, right? So sometimes there's this rigid notion of like laws and the Constitution and how they're enforced and how government.
I already know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So what's just kind of weird is how the Purifiers just declare that they're going to have a civilian militia, and like nobody says anything about that. These guys are running around with armed weapons, completely autonomously without any government oversight, and killing mutants. But then, it happens in the next episode, and we'll talk about it. But then so sometimes they kill a mutant and nobody shows up or asks any questions. Then other times they kill a mutant and all of a sudden there's cops all over the place. People are put in cuffs and stuck in the back of a car. And I'm just like, are they legal? Are they illegal? Make a choice. And so this whole kind of thing is funny to me. This scene between Jace and Officer Ted Wilson, where Officer Ted Wilson, who is still a cop, as far as we know, right, is just casually participating in the torture of a person for information. And in this instance, his character goes back and forth over these episodes, which is also an inconsistency. I think maybe explainable, but he feels like Turner is being too easy on Thunderbird and is advocating that they ramp up and accelerate the torture that they're applying. It's the big thing about this scene. It's the first real instance where it's kind of evident that there is an impending power struggle that has already started and will continue and potentially get worse as time goes on between Jace and Ted Wilson. With Wilson kind of being, and it's kind of a mirror to the other side where the Struckers sometimes wonder, did they create a monster by kind of turning Andy loose? And in some ways, I see those things being emoted by Officer Ted Wilson, who I forget the actor's name. I thought I had written it down, but you kind of see the same thing with Ted Wilson, wondering, man, when I brought Turner in, did I create a monster? So I don't know. Did you guys have any thoughts or feelings or different analyses of this scene?
I just think that this show structure is very everywhere, and I think it has no solid structure. It's just because the characters have very contradicting actions. It just, I don't know. There's no clear cut what's going on here, and I noticed with I forgot the guy's name. The father, that's a cop, and he has a daughter that's a mutant, but he works for the mutant nationalists. I mean, the guys the purifiers.
Yeah. So Jace Turner, played by
it's Jace Turner. Okay.
Yeah. But his daughter was killed.
Yeah. And the thing that bothers me is that he knows that this is a mutant hating group, yet he's so shocked when they actually killed a mutant. And it's like, you shouldn't be shocked about this. You should know who you're working for. You've seen the things they've done before. Why are you acting like they did something different now? It's not going to change.
Yeah, I'm kind of annoyed by that too, right? Because in episode 11, when that young boy is shot, he's like, why are you still shocked by this? You know, you've seen and done horrible things, and yet you're still shocked, 2 seasons in.
Yeah, I think so. I'll reserve my comments on that scene until we get to episode.
Oh, I'm mixing the episodes up already.
No. Your guys' comments are fine. That box might be really large to unpack, so I'm gonna hold off. Minute 23, you get Polaris, Blink, and Lorna in the Humvee, and this is slightly comical and slightly tragic as well. You get these relationship issues between Marcos and Lorna, because Marcos is blaring this total bubblegum popcorn pop song out of the radio, which is just, when the scene opens up, the song is playing and it's an overhead camera on the Humvees, and I'm like, that, because I actually think that the music that the modern music that's applied to X-Men is always wonderfully fitting and tonally correct to whatever's going on. You get this aerial camera view of the Humvee speeding along, and I'm like, this song is not like creatively is not what they normally have tuned up for something like this, for like the getting pumped up and the team on their way to an assault. And I'm like, something's going on. And then you zoom into the Humvee and you see that it's this relationship conflict scene. And they're arguing over the song and the radio. And in the course of the conversation, Blink kind of shames them into thinking about John first. But what I find interesting about this scene is not about mutant superpowers. It's entirely a purely relationship scene. And a lot of it that it evokes is, I remember when I was younger, before I got married, when I was, and even as I was older as a bachelor, and all of my friends around me were married, and seeing everyone go through like their like serious dating, engagement, early marriage, like fights and arguments, and not being part of that scene, but like still like partying with those friends, and just having to like try and like crawl into my glass or like sink right entirely into the seats of a sofa cushion so I wouldn't be seen, so like I wouldn't feel so awkward being in the midst of like these couples who were having these knockdown drag out fights. That's what this Humvee scene kind of reminded me of. And so it kind of evoked a smile, but I kind of liked how it was kind of crafted and structured. I don't know. Did you guys have any thoughts on that one?
I honestly forgot what music was on that scene. Like, it draws a blank in my head.
Yeah, I don't remember the specific song. I just remember that it was like I mean, what you can imagine is like a Backstreet Boys or an NSYNC, right, or like a Britney Spears song playing, while these two like super heavy specialized military Humvees are rolling down the highway with a bunch of mutants about to go attack a hate group's compound. Right? It was just not what you would expect. You would expect to hear like A-Team music or like, you know, techno music like from The Rock or something like that, but it was just completely out of sequence or out of tone with like what you'd expect to see in the scene.
Okay.
I don't know, Dave, any thoughts on that? On that scene?
None really.
Okay. No problem. And the last one for this episode that I kind of wanted to talk to you guys about was now when you get the scene outside the compound where the X-Men are planning their attack, the X-Men Hellfire Club team up. There's a lot of admitting of the team's limitations, right? Everybody talks about, well, we could do this, well, we could do that. And then Marco says, well, we're going to have bullets coming in from everywhere, so we can't rely on Polaris to like stop all the bullets. They talked about the limitations in blink powers and whatever. And finally what they come around to is that they all need to split up. The scene, while classic in some ways, also felt very contrived, I guess I have to admit, because the pairings are completely weird. You put Andy with Lauren, you deliberately put Polaris with Marcos, and it's clearly a setup just for them to go their separate ways and have these awkward, angsty conversations about their relationships and how they like each other but don't like each other and trust each other but don't trust each other. And then it's starting to feel a little tropish when they also do this, and inevitably what always happens for some reason is you get Reed and Caitlin back in a van on a radio with cameras somewhere, like completely separated from their children while their children like head into, you know, into clear and present danger. And in the past, I mean, something would always happen to them. Now it seems like more so like they're always doing things to other people. So I don't know. Any thoughts on this scene or anything else in the episode? Because once we clear this, we will head on into episode 11.
I'm not sure is this episode of that it happens in because I noticed Lana has the same problem that Jace has. That she is shocked when Reva kills. Wants to not feel sorry for humans and wants to kill them all, and it's like she's done it before, and you're still shocked too. So it's like I see the same thing happen with both those characters, and yeah, that's all I think I can say. And I noticed we haven't talked about the doctor with the cure.
Yeah, we talked about her briefly when we talked about I mean, so she was in episode 9, and we talked about that briefly. I don't know. Did you have anything? Did you have something else you wanted to go back?
Well, I just didn't expect the doctor to turn around and say that she wants to cure all mutants. I was think that got me unexpected that she wants to cure all the mutants. She doesn't want them to have any abilities. She wants to make them completely human. I thought she cared about the mutants. I guess.
Yeah, she kind of duped us all, right? She and her big telling, you know, thing at the end of episode 9 was that, you know, she basically, I mean, she basically says Lauren and I forget the guy who's there with her.
Yeah, the guy that she liked. Yeah,
Brandon or Norman or something like that. She basically says, you know, your daughter never should have been born, which,
yeah, that was like, cruel.
You want to drive a parent to picking a side, like, because I definitely love the camera flash to like Caitlin and Reed's face when she said that, and see it all contorted, and they were like, "Oh hell nah!" Like, you know, like it's so like any consideration that we weren't about to do what we were about to do, like that's off the table with that statement. So,
And I don't know, does the doctor die in the scene where everything collapses? And
I don't think she died. I mean, I think she was hurt. The last thing I think what I remember is her kind of being collapsed on the floor as, you know, Norman like vibrated everything to hell, as far as I can remember, whatever his powers were.
And for some reason, the Struckers just run away without care in the world for the doctor, whatever happens to her. And for some reason, the mother cares about that purifier. It's just, she's picking and choose to me.
Right. Dave, did you have something else you were going to say before we go on to episode 11?
No, totally. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so episode 11, Memento. What we see in this scene is we get our flashback where after the death of his sister, Andreas von Strucker takes the music box to a shop in New Orleans and has it altered to leave something behind, but we don't know what it is at that point. We see Riva bring in new recruits into the Hellfire Club with a sadistic past that makes Lorna realize Riva has to be stopped. That's kind of where she makes her choice. Lauren studies the history of the Von Struckers, winds up dreaming about Andrea's death. We start to see her powers transform. She is able to then start turning her barriers into cutting discs. Caitlin takes a shine to this development of a new power, even though Reed is not too happy about it. But Caitlin feels like, hey, look, if we're going up to roll heavy onto the inner circle, then some added power, horsepower, is not a bad idea. Lauren, at the end of the episode, goes and intimidates the landlord because he, during the course of this episode, calls the cops and has them show up and harass the Struckers. We also find out that Lauren finds hair samples of the original Fenris in the music box in a secret compartment. Apparently, Andreas von Strucker, after his sister died, kept a lock of her hair, intertwined it with his own, and then left it in the box for his descendants. Benedict Ryan, who's played by Peter Gallagher in this movie from Fright Night, I think is where he's from. I'm not sure. He sends the purifiers out and they invade the youth shelter, which is where we get the shooting take place. And even though Jay seems remorseful, as you guys mentioned, he does in the end decide, just when we think there's no more, just when we think he's hit rock bottom, we find out that there's always more bottom on the path to being evil. And covers for Officer Ted Wilson, who's played by Tom O'Keefe, I think the name is. And then
I also think that he could spin it further and be like, well, you owe me a favor now, Ted. You know. Yeah,
I mean, it's going to be interesting to see where it goes. What was interesting? Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh, I was going to also add, like, even bigger shocker than that was his wife, like, wanted to make contact, and he was like, "No, I'm done with you." And that was, I feel like that could be the point of no return. I'm not quite sure, but I feel like him choosing to let go of his wife now and embrace his genocidal thoughts was kind of like, oh shoot. I want to get your input on that one though.
Yeah, so let me make two more things just in the rundown and the synopsis. So the other thing that occurs in the episode is we see Evangeline Whedon call Thunderbird and tell him to gather up his Mutant Underground crew because she's going to gather and unite all of the Mutant Underground. And then we also see Lorna and Marcos, when they team back up together and start surveilling Riva, we see the two of them Riva actually meet with Benedict Ryan. So we see the leader of the Hellfire Club, who is advocating for the blatant murder of humans, meet and exchange envelopes with the guy who's on TV calling for war against the mutants. So it seems like a big conspiracy. So this was actually not on my scene rundown, but we'll go ahead and get into it because I do want to unpack this a little. While we could see within each character's tracks and inconsistencies, I feel like the whole shooting and in the backside of it and the conversation with the wife does follow a pattern of logical structure for me. I think what the writers are painting in those scenes are that, first of all, Officer Ted Wilson experiences the attack on the compound, gets severely injured in that attack. I mean, probably could have definitely been killed because the Struckers throw the door open and basically smash him into the wall with a pretty heavy door. I think the room that they would have had Thunderbird in would have had a very heavyweight security door in case John ever got free. So we're probably talking about a door of several hundred pounds with the force of 2 mutants flinging it open. He's severely injured. There's a scene where he comes in and talks to Jace, and he's completely surprised by the fact that Jace is mounting up the civilian militia to go back out. And he's like, we were just attacked on our own compound, and you're gearing everybody up to go back out. And I think what we're seeing painted in Officer Wilson is there's some degree of PTSD that I think he has. He has gone through a fairly traumatic experience, been severely injured, and feels like he's not ready to be back out in the field carrying a handgun. And one of the things that happens is when you experience an assault like that, you get very jumpy, right? You get very trigger happy. You like if your reaction window to a threat used to be 2 seconds, right? You start expanding that and backing it off, right? Because you want more buffer time, right, to emotionally and hormonally address the threat. So then Jace puts him in a room by himself with a mutant who has powers that don't require him to raise his hands, right? That kid was emitting gas from his fingertips. I don't think that there's any like physical requirement for him to raise his hands to do that. He puts him in a room with the kid. He's jumpy as heck. He fires at the guy. So all of this track is that there's a reason for Officer Wilson to shoot the kid. There is a reason why Wilson didn't want to be in the field in the first place. There's a reason why that is Jace's fault. Jace, you can see the conflict in him, right? He's looking back and forth between the car and the cop who's questioning him after the fact. And he arrives at a decision to cover for Officer Wilson. Partially because it's his fault, right? Because he's like, I don't agree with the shooting. He's a mutant, but he's still a child. I wouldn't have wanted that to happen, but at the end of the day, I shouldn't have put that guy out in the field, so I'm going to make the moral decision to cover for him. And then the phone call with the wife, what I felt I saw transpired and heard in his voice was, he's not proud of what he's done. He doesn't think he should be a hero. Frickin' Benedict Ryan is on television with painting his face up and upholding him as this shining example of what the nation should be doing. He feels horrible about the way things have gone down. His wife then calls him, and that's the reason she wants to get back together with him. And he feels that's not how he wants to come back to his wife. He wants his wife to actually see what he's doing as something virtuous, and he knows that in the strictest sense of the rules of engagement and the rules of the use of deadly force, he knows that this was not a clean kill. And so he doesn't, I think what he also admits at this point, and you're right, as I'm talking through it, I realize I agree with you. It's probably a pivotal point. I think it's the point where he realizes he's like, I'm hitting a point of no return. Like, I am not a good person. I don't think I can pull myself out of this nosedive. While I love my wife and I've been wanting to get back with her, I think I'm hitting this point of realization where I just need to let her go because I am not a good man. So that's just kind of my whole unpack.
Yep. Totally agree. Yep.
Right.
I totally agree as well. I thought that Jace is gonna be at peace with his wife, but he decided not to. And I could see why when you just explained it.
All right, cool. So that was really the main thing to unpack in this episode. I'll try and check out these scene things as one-liners now. We already kind of talked about the opening scene. One thing that I did want to mention is, the three people that are part of that crew that took down the cruise ship. One of the actors, the female in the group, billeted as Heather in the cast listing, is played by Shel Ramos, who also appears on Cloak and Dagger. I don't remember her character. Her character is somebody named Delia, who apparently appeared in the episode Suicide Sprints, which, Dave, if you remember, was where they blamed Cloak for losing the game and then had them all run sprints after basketball practice until they threw up, and then he got beat up. We also talked about Polaris confronting Riva after the fact, and one of the switcheroos that happens at this point is, and I think what we get is, again, we talk about Riva's being particularly manipulative, is that Riva says at this point that, hey, Polaris is like, so what, while you bring in this murdering crew, then I'm just supposed to sit on the sidelines? And Riva basically says, look, you're royalty, which is kind of a reference to the notion of Magneto as being like the king of mutants. But what we kind of see at this point is Riva doesn't want Polaris to get her hands dirty, but also I think what it evokes is this notion that Riva knows that there are bad, nasty things to be done that Polaris will not do because Polaris has thresholds. So I don't know. So David, it sounded like you were in agreement with that. Steven, any other thoughts on that?
I tried to collect all the information and got lost.
Sorry.
It's okay. This is one thing that did bother me with this episode is you said the things about the laws, and this specific scene where with Lauren and her parents, the landlord calls the landlord calls the cops, and they come in with their guns pointed as soon as he opens the door. As soon as Reed opens the door, and they go in when Reed mentions you can't come in here without a warrant, and they say, "Oh, I could come here with probable cause," which still doesn't excuse you. You still can't come in without a warrant, and it's just. And you can't point guns at people without them actually doing anything yet. You can't just aim a gun at a person as soon as they open the door. That's still illegal. And it's just illegalness going everywhere. And it's just the law logic in this show is not correct. It's just
I admit it gets a little wonky, and I would disagree with you on some of those points, but I think the whole point of it is that, again, it addresses the application of the law inconsistently in some ways, which yields people having to have conversations where you like onesie twosie have to parse these very micro instances of whether or not that's a reasonable expectation as a plot point. So I won't. In this episode, we also have Marcos and Clarice go to see the Morlocks. We see Marcos having a very intimate scene with the mutant Glow, who joined the Morlock camp and took the sign of the Morlocks. We see them unpack a lot of stuff about Marcos's relationship with Lorna. Then we go on and we have the scene with Clarice and Erg, where we definitely see that Erg along the way has developed some degree of feelings for Clarice. Clarice says she won't join the Morlocks. She doesn't say that it's because of her love for John, which initially I thought she was trying to protect Erg's feelings. But then I realized it's actually more about, I think, a thing that the writers were trying to craft where she was able to make a statement where it could be interpreted as being very clear that she never had any intention of joining the Morlocks, despite Urg's request for her to inform him of what was going up above. There was never really any intention or lack of loyalty to the mutant underground. And I think that was an important thing to establish for her character in order to ensure that her character is not just an arm piece for Thunderbird, right? To show her as a character of independent thought and importance in the leadership of the mutant underground. The scene also finally caused me to realize, because I just kind of been accepting it, why in the flippin' world does Urg have a damn English accent? I don't know. I don't know why every black man playing a position of leadership in sci-fi stuff has to have an English accent. Idris has one, and that's fine. He's actually British, like everybody else. I don't get it. But any other thoughts on this episode and that specific scene with the Morlocks, or anything else that we want to cover in the discussion of episode 11?
It's about the guy that's like Callisto, right? I wasn't sure which character he was talking about.
Yeah, he's basically the male palette swap for what would have normally been Callisto in the comic books.
Yeah. I do notice he does have a British accent, just thinking about it now. I didn't notice it until you mentioned it. Yeah. But I have no idea where he's from, so I guess is he from British or is he American? I don't know.
I don't know. I just thought it was funny that the leader of the Morlocks, which is an underground group firmly on American soil, and as far as we know, where are they now in this? They're not in Atlanta anymore, right? But I don't know. Are they in DC? Is that where they're supposedly kept out? I don't know. I just thought
I don't know where the Morlocks are.
I just thought it was completely over the top that like this dude has a British accent.
And the comics is in New York, but here it could be
right.
anywhere. I don't know.
Right. So Dave, I know you're a big fan of the Morlocks and have been particularly interested in the presentation of their story on screen. Any particular feelings that you had about these particular scenes in episode 11?
Just that I enjoyed it a lot.
I thought it was interesting with I guess I forgot what the girl's name was, but the one that had feelings for Marcus and Marcus rejected.
Yeah, Glow.
Oh, that's her name. Okay. Mm-hmm. Oh, no wonder when he touched her, the M was
her
glowing.
Cheek lit up. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm kind of in the same place you are, Dave. I mean, my feeling across these episodes is I don't know that there's anyone that I like sharply disliked. But what I did feel is I felt like 10 to me was kind of like watching like a 45-minute action movie. It was very awesome getting to see them assault the compound. Like we have this in comics too, right? You have your issues in the arc, and some of those issues are a talking head piece where there's just talking and nothing really happens, or you get the precursor to the big showdown. And again, there's lots of talking and planning, but nothing really happens. But then you get like once per arc at least you get like the really big fight scene between like all of the forces amassed, the Justice League, Legion of Doom. That's what episode 10 kind of felt like to me. And then episode 11 I felt like was the best acted scene that I've seen this season. I was particularly moved by the final scene with Polaris and Marcos, even though I was like, you two may not want to kiss because that Aurora Borealis effect that you two throw off can sometimes be seen from like across town. And I was like, when they did it, I was like, whoa, is somebody going to see them from Hellfire Tower or whatever? But I thought that was that whole conversation between the two of them was very moving, and an important thing to do to have them heal from the direction that Polaris went. So that's all I had for episodes 9, 10, and 11 of The Gifted. Anything else that you guys wanted to mention?
I know his logic was thrown out the window when it came to Lauren having dreams of her ancestors. I just don't. I guess because she has a bond. I don't know. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, I guess that's one thing we didn't mention. So I felt that happened because of her proximity to the hairs and the DNA and the way that the combinatorial X genes that they have are supposed to. I mean, just like the Struckers were supposed to have had dreams before, the brother sister Fenris pair. But I guess one thing I didn't know that I actually came across was apparently, this is a thing from the comics. Apparently, what Andreas Strucker did is when the sister died, he skinned her alive and wrapped her skin around the sword, and that's why, so that he could still basically hold hands with her and exercise his like super high level powers. So that's the effect that we see at the beginning in the flashback when he points the sword at the guy and basically like envelops him in some big Strucker plasma beam. That's apparently the Fenris sword. That was composed of metal wrapped in the skin of his dead sister. So I was like,
ew,
wow,
gross.
yeah, right.
Now that I didn't remember that. Now I'm gross to
Yeah,
out about it.
but I was also super impressed that they would reach for something that niche, right, to render in the television show.
Yeah.
Usually, even the comic book television shows usually don't dig that deep in the history of these characters, so I was pretty impressed.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, go ahead. Steven, anything else, or Dave, anything else?
No, I think we covered it. I don't think Lauren's going to go all evil. I think they'll figure that out. I think they're just trying to tease us, but that's about it for me.
Yeah, that's one thing I didn't mention was I was not particularly happy. I didn't really like the scene with her and the landlord. I felt it was a little too over the top, and I didn't understand it.
Yeah, she went to go. Was it scare him?
Yeah, to lean on him really hard and like threatened him, and I'm like, well, I don't know why we would have two evil Struckers like that. That seems to eliminate that conflict and tension.
I don't know if that's why I said I don't know where Andy's going, because he's going evil and Lauren's going evil. It's just I don't understand the structure of the show. It's very contradicting, and I don't even understand why Reva is working with Benedict Ryan when they both have two opposite. One hates humans and one hates mutants. Where is this going?
Yeah, but that's a setup. There's an intention behind that. I think to eventually reveal that this whole notion of conflict between the mutants is staged, and was a partnership for them both to achieve like their own personal things. It's not about Benedict protecting humanity, and it's not about Reva protecting mutants. It's about them, right? It's the same reason Intel and AMD collude to drive graphics card prices higher, right? That's what it's all about. But yeah, and I think the last thing I'll mention is, and Dave and I have talked about this on the episode. So they have done the Strucker switcheroo on us before. If you remember, one time when the Strucker twins when the Strucker pair was together, and they could have killed a lot of people, Andy was the one who took his hand away and told Lauren no before. So there is the possibility that they're going to flip-flop their approaches to these roles because, again, they've set that pattern in history with us before. So I think that's going to do it for us. We will probably regather after episodes 12 and 13 to close out the season.
Well, I'm not sure, is because I noticed in the Wikipedia it says 16 episodes, but they only have 13 episodes showing up. So I don't know what's it gonna be. It was 13 or 16.
Dave, you were telling us what the deal with that was, right? Oh, you're still muted, Dave.
I'm still mute.
As far as I can tell, it looks like so January 8th is is that the one we just had? Oh, sorry. We have January 15th is Home, and then episode 13, Tempted, is January 22nd. But it seems like that their episode 13 might, like, why would they go for another break? So I feel like it has to go up to 13. So maybe they decided to wrap it up early. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know. I guess we'll see when it happens.
Or they're going to have a break before the season finale. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's weird. Do either of you see where it's anything like last year where the last episode is actually 2 episodes back to back in a 2-hour block?
No.
Okay. All right, well, we'll play it by ear. So we should be back to talk about episodes 12 and 13. That might be the end of the season. It might not. Hopefully by then we will have clarity and we will know. But other than that, thanks so much for joining us here on this episode of It's Another Thing. It has been wonderful as always. Once again, on behalf of the E2KG Network and Gearworks.com, this has been A Ghastly Stamus with my two co-hosts, David Pecci and Stephen Laura. We'll be back in a few weeks near the end of the month to talk about 2 more episodes. That's going to do it for us. We're out of here.